The Thing Under the Glacier by Brian W. Aldiss. Originally published in a 1969 anthology entitled Blast Off and republished in 3 more anthologies, In Time to Come in 1973, Space 2 in 1974, and Skylark Science Fiction Stories in 1980. It appeared in one collection of the author's stories entitled The Complete Short Stories, the 1960s, Part 2, in 2015. Read by Darrell T. Smith II for my channel, Quasar Spectra. The Thing Under the Glacier. The glacier extended under the brow of the nearest mountain peak or nunatak. As Antarctic glaciers went, it was a fairly large one, and at this point had some 30 miles to go before it creaked its way down to the Ross ice shelf, and so, eventually, to the sea. Resting on its surface was a flying machine of unusual design. Its body lay at the apex of 3 long legs, each of which ended in a large metal spoon. These spoons enabled the helicopter to land safely on snow or ice. A transparent plastic dome covered the flyer, the boring machine that stood nearby, and the metal hut near the borer. The shaft bored down into the glacier beside the hut. A robot stood indecisively near the top of the shaft. A man and a boy came out of the metal hut, buttoning up their jackets. They had snatched a brief rest and were now going back to work. Both of them looked tired, but full of suppressed excitement. The boy was strong and willowy, much like his father in build, and with the same deep-set eyes. He walked like his father, confidently, but with care. Grinning, he nodded at the robot standing by the hole in the ice. "Don't you think we ought to switch Goonie off while we go down the shaft, Dad?" Jed Jarvis asked. His father smiled and shook his head. "We need Goonie switched on in case we get into any kind of trouble down below. You needn't worry that he will fall down the hole. Goonie has a lot more sense than you'd think to look at him." The robot that went by the undignified name of Goonie was humanoid in shape, but his designers, in accommodating the engine, gyroscope, and brain that were essential to his working, had given him an immense chest and a comically low brow. He was of scarlet, plastic-coated metal, unlike Captain Jarvis and his son, who were thickly wrapped. Goonie needed no clothes, despite the polar cold that penetrated under the dome. "Let's get moving, then," Captain Jarvis said. He took a last look round. The glacier was wide at this point, perhaps a quarter-mile wide, and was moving slowly, less than a foot a day at its fastest point. The low hills that flanked it were naked rock where the snow and ice did not cover them. The climate here in the Queen Maud Range, no more than 200 miles from the pole, was too bleak even for lichen. The sad masses of rock were heavily scarred where the ice floe had once rubbed them, for in this year of 1994 the glacier was smaller than it had been even a century ago. When the captain tied the hood of his jacket into place, Jed did the same, adjusting the little apparatus behind his right ear and grinning up at his father. "Now for a bit of real work," he said. "You don't know what real work is." His father smiled. "When I was a boy back in the 1960s, I'd have been at school at your age." Over the top of the shaft, suspended from a joist overhead, was a platform onto which they both climbed. In the middle of the platform was set a control pillar. The captain touched a button on this, and the platform began to sink. For a moment they could see out onto the surface of the glacier. Then they were swallowed into the hole. Jed switched the platform light on. At once the ice about them glowed with a greenish hue and flung back vague reflections. It was patterned by the flanges of the bore that had drilled this hole down into the living ice. It also had its own marking, a series of layers formed by yearly accumulations of fern or old ice. After staring at it for a minute, Jed said, "What was this school you had to go to, Dad? Was it a bad thing?" Not bad. Necessary. It was rather like the classes you went to when you were 6, to learn how to get the best from the miniputer behind your ear, only school went on for years. It sounds boring to me. I wasn't bored because I always liked learning new things, but some of the chaps were bored. You see, in those days, anything you wanted to learn, you had to get into your own head. We didn't have mini-pewters in those days. Computers had been invented, and they were getting smaller, but it wasn't until the great developments in microtechnology in the 70s that portable computers were made. After a minute's silence, Jed said, "I'm glad I didn't live in an old-fashioned period like the 1960s. We thought ourselves lucky at the time, although we had to go to school. Nowadays, all the knowledge you could possibly want is packed into the punched molecules stored behind your right ear, and anything new you learn is transferred direct from your head to the miniputer. Think we're going to learn anything new down the bottom of this shaft, Dad? What do you think that thing is we half uncovered in the fern? I'd bust a transistor if it turned out to be an early man. Do you think it could be?" In a solemn voice, his father said, "I can't think what else it could be." "We'll make history, won't we, Pop?" "We'll certainly uncover it, Jed." They stood impatiently, anxious to be with their discovery. Although schools were a thing of the past, holidays were not. Between the ages of 6 and 13, most boys were taken on research holidays by their parents. Research holidays generally took the form of travel to a part of the world unfamiliar to them, to the Sahara, to see the vast new reforestation farms, to the stations under the Atlantic where so many shoals of fish were bred for food, to Cambodia to see the ruins of ancient civilizations, to the domed colonies of Mars, to the volcanoes of Central Africa, to the frontier stations from which the Amazon was being tamed, or to the white-shrouded regions of the poles. At the end of this holiday period, a boy could handle his environment and himself, and be about 3 times as knowledgeable as any previous generation, thanks to the unsleeping miniputer that was almost a part of him. At 14, he was a man. Jed was 13. Fond though he was of his father, he looked forward to his coming independence. This excursion, the last he would make with Captain Jarvis, was the most adventurous and the most important. It was something of a field test of Jed's abilities, and he would be examined on its results by the London Educational Authority when they got home. The LEA had financed this expedition, flying Jed and his father out to the edge of the ice field, together with their plane, boring equipment, and other supplies. If he passed their exam, he would be well set to follow his father into the space fleet. But at present Jed's thoughts were engaged with the wonders of this planet, and the hole down which they sank held as much glamour as a rocket trajectory. For they sank down not only through the ice, but through the past, to a world that had never been explored before. Inevitably, they felt excited as they thought of the strange creature they had to dig out at the bottom of the hole. Jed stood there, watching the endless cables snake past, cables for light, air, water suction, power, and refrigeration, for their chief problems at the bottom of the shaft were, oddly enough, water and heat. Instinctively, he switched over to his miniputer to review the situation. It was a simple thing to do. Many of the parts of the miniputer were synthetic biochemical units, their controls built into Jed's oral cavity. He switched on by simple neural impulse. At once, the mighty resources of the machine, equal to the libraries of the world, billowed like a curtain on the fringes of his brain. The machine responded, like an electroencephalograph, to the minute impulses of his brain and flicked over at his command to the particular section of knowledge that he wanted to consult. Its voice came to his mind, filling it with relevant words, figures, and pictures. "The shaft you have bored goes down 1,320 yards, exactly 3/4 of a mile, to the bottom of the glacier where it scours the underlying rock. The speed of the glacier is such that this shaft will be unsafe in another couple of days. It will bend out of shape. The motion—" The boy cut it off impatiently in his head and thought, "Tell me about the time the glacier was formed." The mini-pewter showed no vexation at interruptions. It said, "The present ice age began 500,000 years ago, although it was once much more severe than it is now. When the ice covered a lot of Britain, Europe, and North America, we still live in an ice age compared with the mild Cenozoic age that went before. Of all continents, the Antarctic has been hardest hit by ice. The glacier probably began as the first endless snows began to snow." As it spoke, it flashed one of its staggeringly vivid pictures into Jed's mind. Howling through great forests, slicing through grasslands, came cold winds. The landscape grew darker, more barren. Snow fell. It fell in the valleys and on the high mountains. Goats scampered along a ridge of rock, lost in the growing wilderness of white. And the tide of white turned drab-gray, and grew and grew. It compressed under its own weight and began to slide and scrape downwards. Avalanches rolled into the valleys. More snow fell on top of the avalanches. Rivers of impacted ice grated across the land towards the misty and distant sea, forced through the flanks of cliffs as easily as toothpaste from a tube. Along the desolate shores, where now only a few of the most hardy and adaptable creatures, like seals and penguins, survived, the arms of ice sprawled slowly outwards over the sea. Occasionally, with mighty splashes, they cracked and broke apart, and icebergs were formed, making citadels of cold that headed grandly for warmer waters. And, "Jed, we're down, lad," Captain Jarvis said. The boy switched off the pictures and helped his father unload their kit from the platform. As he did so, he looked at the huddled thing in one corner. For a nasty moment, he thought he saw something move there. Here they had hollowed out a small cave in the ice, with room enough for them to work and stand up in. This was the bottom of the glacier. Underfoot, scoured for centuries by the ever-moving shoe of ice, lay bedrock. At this point, it had faulted, revealing a crevice part filled with the muck of the glacier and frozen solid under permafrost. It was in this hole that their find lay. They had covered it with a rug heater while they spent a rest period on the surface. The heater was melting the permafrost that covered the body while the small pump drained away excess moisture. Kneeling down, Jed pulled the cover almost reverently away. Again, he thought he saw a swift, furtive movement, but the light was not good down here, and his eyes could have been mistaken. He switched on the light he wore on a steel circlet round his head and looked down. His father bent over his shoulder. In the dirt, a human-like figure was huddled, as it must have huddled at the moment of its death, hundreds of centuries ago. Its back and one shoulder was clear of the dirt. Its face was buried. Working together, Captain Jarvis and Jed continued the business of freeing the body from its long prison. The softening of the earth made the task much easier than it had been. In half an hour, working steadily, shoveling the dirt out behind them, they uncovered an arm and a hand. The hand had a curious double palm. From each palm protruded 4 opposed fingers. They were without nails. Father and son stared at each other in silence. The drip of water came to their ears, and the perpetual grumble of the glacier. "It's not human," Jed said. He switched to the mini-pewter, an automatic gesture to reassure himself. The machine said, "On the continent of Antarctica, before the ice came, evolution may have followed a path of its own. Being isolated, it may have developed special life forms, as Australia did. They would all have been wiped out when the snows fell." But the mini-pewter was only a thinking machine. Captain Jarvis, who had served many years in the space fleet, had something more useful to contribute. "Let's get this dirt shifted quickly." He climbed down into the small hole they had made and began shoveling rapidly. Jed helped as best he could, slipping padded supports under the body so that it would not fall to pieces as it was freed. Finally, the whole body was uncovered except for the left leg. The captain got to work with a small pick to loosen it from the grip of the permafrost. It came loose, and they could lift the body tenderly out between them. Together, they turned it upside down and laid it on the ground. Two great protruding eyes stared up at them, balanced over a thin cat's mouth. The skin was mottled like a frog's, although that could have been just an effect of dirt and age. The effect was less horrific than totally alien. "What is it?" Jed asked, pale of face. His miniputer had no answer. They took in more details. Withered eyelids were drawn to either side of the staring eyes. Captain Jarvis pointed at them. "No man or beast has ever been born with eyes that do not close with a vertical movement," he said. "Whatever we've found, this creature is not of Earth, Jed." As he spoke, there was a movement in the shadows behind them. From under the discarded rug heater, something sprang. It leaped onto the creature with staring eyes and stood on its chest as if defiantly. It was a rat thing, yet it had no tail, nor whiskers, nor face. It had a multiplicity of fingers and legs and claws, and a number of studs on its back. So it seemed, but the thing was covered with dirt, and in a moment it was gone. Jed let out a yelp of surprise. Jumping round so that the shadows scattered, Captain Jarvis snatched up a spade. The rat thing made a fast circuit of the cavity walls. Captain Jarvis flung the spade at it and missed. The animal bounded onto the platform and started swarming up its cable. Jed flung a dislodged stone at it, but it continued to climb and was almost at once lost to sight up the shaft. "Why did you want to hit it?" Jed asked. "Because it must have been in the hole with this, whatever it is, and it's alive. It has survived 500,000 years under a glacier. What sort of a tough life form is that? We just can't afford to have it loose." He pressed buttons on the tiny radiophone strapped to his wrist until he had Goonie's wavelength above. "Goonie," he said, "we're coming back up, but before we get there, you will see something else climb out of the shaft. It is a small, fast, rat-like object. It is tough, and it is alive. Catch it and hold it. Can do?" Goonie's reply came clearly. "Can do, Captain Jarvis." "I wonder," Jed said. "If he takes it by surprise, he should be able to catch it. Goonie's fast. Now let's get out of this hole. What about this chap with the eye trouble, Dad?" "We'll collect him later. I want to make sure our rat friend does no damage on top. I can use my revolver up there. Down here, I'd bring the whole glacier down about our ears." The platform seemed to take an age to carry them back through the green-lit bore of ice. When they got to the top, they jumped out onto the surface. Goonie had caught the rat thing, but it looked as if the rat thing had caught Goonie. The low-browed robot stood by the boring machinery with the rat clutched in its metal hands and half raised to its ear. The rat had shot out a tendril which probed into one of the aerial sockets on Goonie's temple. The robot was motionless. "Goonie!" Jed exclaimed, running forward, but his father caught his arm. "Better not touch him until we see what is happening." He said to the robot, "Are you receiving me, Goonie? What's the matter?" The robot made no answer. It continued to stand transfixed. Captain Jarvis undid his jacket, drew his revolver, and advanced. He was within a couple of paces of the robot when it spoke. "This thing in my hand is not alive. It is a machine like me. Now that it understands that we are rational beings, it will speak with us." Slowly, Goonie opened its hand. The rat machine sat there, withdrawing its wire tendril from the robot and regarding them. "Well, "I'm blessed," Captain Jarvis said. "How does it know English?" "It learnt it from me," said the robot. "The process took it about 15 milliseconds. It has no amplifier circuits, and so cannot speak aloud, but it could speak to Jed through his mini-pewter." "Let me, Father," Jed said, stepping forward. He put his hand over the robots and touched the rat machine. "If it is rational, it will know better than to wish to cause any harm. We will speak together." The tendril came out on the machine again. It waved blindly and searchingly. Jed brought his head forward. On the surface of the mini-pewter was a number of intake holes through which additional data could be fed. He felt the wire slide over it and insert itself in one of the intakes. New knowledge hit him like a body blow. It came in a wave of pictures, unsorted and unrelated, maddening, frightening, and exciting all at once. He screamed a frantic, mental, "Stop!" and the muddle died. Even in that brief, intoxicating instant, a great wedge of fact had been driven into his brain. "They come from Venus," he told his father. "They worked together. The big-eyed people were the dominant race on Venus. Scientifically, they were highly advanced. These little rat machines are their equivalent of mini-pewters. It's a bit confused. This machine seems a little mad. All those centuries in the ice must have had some effect on it." "Ask it," Captain Jarvis said, but Jed held up his hand. The information was coming again, and this time the mini-pewter was arranging it for him in more manageable fashion. But again its novelty took him like a blow, until he was swept away through time and space to stand on a different planet. The big-eyed people of Venus called themselves Hinoi. They had evolved into what they were when the solar system was still comparatively young, for the dense cloud blanket covering their planet afforded, at first, a shelter from the harsher radiations of the sun. For many millions of years, they were sea-living people. The vast oceans of Venus, with their rapid currents, provided great undersea cliffs that towered 1,000 feet high, and even when they became civilized, the Hinoi loved best to live in apartments clinging to these abysses. But as time passed, they took more to the land and became dependent upon the arts of the land. Unlike man, who is adaptable and aggressive, the Hinoi progressed because they were peaceable and stubborn. They solved the secrets of nature because secrets were a challenge to them. It was to help them in this task that they developed the rat machines, which they called, affectionately, scuttlefish. A period came when the Hinoi culture seemed to stagnate. Their numbers became fewer, and at this time something happened to Venus that, the records in the rocks showed, had happened some long while before. The planet entered one of its periodic heat ages. "This heat age will be severe. We may all be destroyed," declared one of the remaining Hinoi scientists when they had gathered together to investigate the situation. His prediction seemed inescapable. The atmospheric blanket covering Venus was so thick that once a heat rise began, it would accumulate. Of course, the process would be gradual, taking many thousands of years to reach its peak, much like an ice age on Earth, but it would be nonetheless disastrous for that. Eventually, metals like tin would flow over the baked surface in streams, and all life would perish. "So be it," said the elders of the Hinoi. But a young group of Hinoi did not accept defeat so easily. They knew that the sun existed as a separate body beyond the everlasting clouds, and so they reasoned that there might be other bodies like Venus there as well. After many centuries of planning and experimentation, they built flying vessels that rose above the cloud cover. So, for the first time, they came face to face with the mystery of space. In a few more generations, they built a spaceship. After some initial trials, when the ship was manned by scuttlefish alone, a large party of male and female Hinoi said goodbye to their fellows, entered the ship, and blasted off for the nearest planet. They landed without mishap on Earth. They found themselves at the temperate South Pole, a pleasantly mountainous region stocked with spruce forests that swept down to the sea and teeming with game, mainly deer of many kinds. The Hinoi took their ship apart to make dwellings and settled down happily to a pastoral kind of life. "Why didn't they settle elsewhere, in Europe or Africa?" Jed groaned. He was telling the story to Captain Jarvis as it was unfolded to him. "They doomed themselves by settling where they did." For already, though the Hinoi did not know it, the Cenozoic was closing with the beginnings of the Ice Age. After only a few winters, frosts set in. On high ground, snow accumulated and did not go when the summer sun came again. To the Hinoi, these were just the alien manifestations of a strange planet. They did not understand seasonal or climatic change. With the stubbornness of their race, they stayed where they were, and the blizzards grew in strength and anger, and the everlasting winter came and buried them. Their settlements remained locked a mile down under the ice until Jed and his father happened on one solitary individual. "I feel so sorry for them," Jed said when the scuttlefish had finished its story. "So do I," his father agreed. "They sound like admirable people, and I'd like to have met them, yet I'm glad they perished." "How can you say that, when they were so harmless?" His father smiled. "Harmlessness is relative. Supposing they had settled in Europe, they would have met with early man. Do you think they would have spared him? In the nature of things, they would probably have had to kill him or be killed. There's not room on a planet for two dominant species." In a small voice, Jed said, "I see what you mean. If the Hinoi had survived, we wouldn't be here. That's quite a thought, isn't it? All the same, Dad, I can't help feeling a bit sorry that they've all gone, and we shall never meet them." His father nodded. "I feel just the same, but we're lucky to have the scuttlefish. With its help, we can reconstruct the old Venusian civilization, and people can learn about it, and its history will gradually become part of Earth's heritage." "Yes, the Hinoi would like that. Gosh, everyone's in for a surprise, aren't they? Can I radio London HQ and tell them what we found?" "I'd be glad if you'd do that, Jed. I'll go and get the Hinoi up from the bottom of the shaft. Goonie, old pal, you can start dismantling the bore equipment. Our job is done." He went over to the shaft and disappeared from view. The scarlet robot moved into action, leaving the scuttlefish to climb down to the surface of the glacier. Jed sat down in a collapsible chair and dialed the London frequency on his wrist radio. As he waited for an answer, excitement surged in him to think of the wonderful discovery they had made. "It's an odd thing," he remarked to the mini-pewter. "The heat age came to Venus as the Hinoi predicted. There have been human exploratory bases on Venus for a dozen or more years now, and the Hinoi seas have not been found. They must have evaporated long ago. Do you think that Earth will suffer the same fate and we shall have to move to Mars?" After a brief silence, the mini-pewter said, "I have no information on the subject, which is in any case one of mere speculative interest." "Trouble with you is you've no imagination," Jed told it. As the voice of the London station came up, he felt the scuttlefish climb up onto his shoulder and squat there. He shivered to think of its 500,000 years burial under the ice, and then said in a clear voice, "Hello, London? Jarvis Expedition this end. Can you hear me?" A small but distinct voice said, "Hello, Jarvis Expedition. Go ahead." The boy looked out through the plastic dome at the glacier and the Antarctic winter beyond. "We've got something here that may interest you," he began. You've been listening to pre-1990s speculative fiction readings with a highlight on science fiction by Darrell T. Smith II. Please consider clicking the donation link in the description box. Thank you so much for your time and your imagination.